The security feeds crackled with interference as Queen Maria watched the crowded station marketplace. Through multiple camera angles, her fingers drummed against the polished surface of her command desk, eyes fixed on the seemingly ordinary scene unfolding below. Something felt wrong about this particular day, though. She couldn't quite place what it was. A commotion near the Eastern food court caught her attention. Through the grainy feed, she watched a tall human man in worn work clothes rush toward what appeared to be some kind of disturbance. The other species on the station scattered quickly, their various forms hurrying away from whatever was happening. The human didn't run. Instead, he moved with purpose, toward the chaos. Maria leaned forward, adjusting the camera controls to get a better view. The feeds showed an elderly alien collapsed on the station floor, his blue-tinged skin pale and breathing labored. The creature's forearms were splayed awkwardly, and strange mechanical devices were scattered around him like broken toys. Other beings walked past the fallen alien without stopping. A group of Zentari merchants stepped carefully around the body, their multiple eyes focused elsewhere. 2 security officers from different species approached slowly, but seemed reluctant to get involved. The station's medical teams were nowhere to be seen, but the human kept walking toward the scene. Maria felt her pulse quicken as she watched him drop to his knees beside the collapsed alien. The man's movements were careful and deliberate as he checked for signs of life. His hands moved across the alien's torso, searching for something. The Queen switched to another camera angle, trying to get a clearer view of what was happening. The human appeared to be performing some kind of medical assistance, though she couldn't tell exactly what he was doing from this distance. His face showed concentration and concern, not fear or disgust. This was unusual. Most humans on the station kept to themselves, following the unwritten rule of not getting involved in alien affairs. The political climate had been tense lately, with various species viewing humanity's growing influence with suspicion. A human intervening in an alien medical emergency could easily be misinterpreted as something more sinister. The alien's breathing appeared to stabilize under the human's care. Maria watched as the men carefully gathered the scattered mechanical devices, examining them with surprising familiarity. These weren't common items, she realized. They looked like sophisticated medical equipment, far beyond what most civilians would recognize. More concerning was how the humans seemed to know exactly how to use them. Maria activated her communication system, preparing to send security to the scene. But something made her pause. The human's actions didn't suggest any malicious intent. If anything, he appeared to be genuinely helping the fallen alien, asking for nothing in return. The alien's eyes opened slowly, forearms moving weakly as consciousness returned. The human helped him sit up, speaking in what appeared to be the alien's native language. Maria frowned at this detail. Very few humans learned alien languages, especially the complex dialect this particular species used. A crowd was beginning to gather around the scene, though most observers kept their distance. Maria noticed several species she didn't immediately recognize among the watchers. Their attention focused intently on the human and the alien he was helping. The human finished his medical assistance and began to stand, but the alien caught his arm with one of his 4 hands. They appeared to be having an intense conversation, though the audio feed wasn't clear enough for Maria to make out specific words. Then, something strange happened. The alien reached into his clothing and pulled out what looked like a small glowing device. He pressed it into the human's hands, despite the man's apparent protests. The human tried to give it back, but the alien refused, wrapping all 4 of his hands around the human's single hand that held the object. Maria zoomed the camera in as far as it would go, trying to get a better look at the device. It was unlike anything she'd seen before, casting an unusual light that seemed to shift colors as she watched. The alien appeared to be speaking urgently to the human, who listened with increasing surprise. After several minutes, the alien managed to get back to his feet with the human's help. Other members of his species had finally arrived on the scene, but instead of thanking the human, they seemed almost fearful of him. They gathered around their fallen companion quickly, forming a protective circle. The human backed away, still holding the strange device. He looked confused and uncertain, as if he didn't understand what had just happened. The alien gestured to him one final time before being led away by his companions. Maria watched as the human stood alone in the marketplace, staring down at the device in his hands. The crowd began to disperse, but she noticed that several individuals continued to observe him from a distance. Some appeared to be following him as he walked away. The Queen felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the implications of what she had witnessed. That device, whatever it was, had changed everything. The alien's reaction suggested it was far more significant than a simple thank you gift. And now a random human maintenance worker was walking around the station with what might be the most dangerous object in the galaxy. She needed to find out who this human was, and she needed to do it quickly. The security feeds showed him disappearing into the lower levels of the station, still carrying the mysterious device. Several shadowy figures continued to track his movement through the corridors. Maria's hands moved quickly across her console, initiating a station-wide security scan. Whatever was about to happen, she had the feeling that one simple act of kindness was going to change the fate of every living being in the sector. The human had no idea what he had just gotten himself into. The maintenance tunnels beneath the station hummed with activity as Jake Morrison made his way through the familiar corridors. The device in his pocket felt warm against his leg, pulsing with an energy he couldn't begin to understand. Every few minutes he pulled it out to examine it again, hoping to make sense of what the alien had given him. The old creature had spoken in perfect English once the crowd dispersed, his voice urgent and filled with an emotion Jake couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps, or maybe desperation. The words still echoed in his mind, though they made no sense at all. The device itself was beautiful in its strangeness. It was roughly the size of his palm, made from what appeared to be a crystalline material that shifted between deep purple and brilliant silver. Symbols he'd never seen before were etched into its surface, glowing faintly whenever he touched them. Jake paused at an intersection, checking the maintenance schedule on his tablet. He had 3 more systems to inspect before his shift ended, but his mind kept wandering back to the scene in the marketplace. The alien had called the device something in his own language first, then translated it as the key to everything. What could that possibly mean? Behind him, Jake heard the soft sound of footsteps echoing through the tunnel. He turned, expecting to see another maintenance worker, but the corridor was empty. The sounds continued for a moment, then stopped abruptly. His training kicked in immediately. Jake had learned long ago that paranoia was a survival skill in the space stations that served as crossroads for dozens of different species. Trust was a luxury that could get you killed, especially when you were human and far from home. He slipped the device back into his pocket and continued walking, but now his senses were alert to every sound and shadow. The footsteps resumed, staying perfectly matched to his own pace. Someone was definitely following him. Jake reached the next maintenance access point and made a decision that would have surprised his supervisors. Instead of continuing with his scheduled route, he took a detour through a section of tunnels that were supposedly abandoned. If someone was tracking him, he wanted to know who and why. The abandoned tunnels were darker than the main corridors, lit only by emergency strips that cast everything in a dim red glow. Jake moved carefully, using his knowledge of the station's layout to navigate through passages that hadn't seen regular foot traffic in years. The footsteps behind him grew more cautious, but they didn't disappear entirely. Jake found what he was looking for after 10 minutes of careful navigation. A maintenance alcove that provided multiple exit routes while giving him a clear view of anyone approaching. He settled into the shadows and waited. 3 figures appeared in the tunnel within minutes of his arrival. They moved with the fluid grace of professional hunters, their attention focused on the path Jake had taken. 2 appeared to be human, while the third was a species he didn't immediately recognize. They stopped exactly where Jake had turned off the main route, examining the floor and walls for traces of his passage. One of them produced a handheld scanner and began taking readings of the area. Jake felt his blood run cold as he realized what this meant. These weren't casual observers or curious bystanders. They were tracking him with equipment designed to follow someone who didn't want to be found. The alien's gift had made him a target. The lead figure gestured to the others, and they split up to search the connecting tunnels. Jake waited until they were out of sight before moving deeper into the abandoned section of the station. He needed somewhere safe to think, somewhere he could examine the device without worrying about immediate pursuit. The deeper tunnels led to sections of the station that had been sealed off during the last expansion project. Jake had discovered them during a routine inspection months ago, noting several breaches in the containment barriers that would eventually need attention. At the time, he had simply filed a report and moved on. Now, those forgotten spaces might save his life. Jake made his way through a narrow maintenance hatch into what had once been crew quarters for construction workers. The rooms were empty and dark, filled only with the distant hum of the station's life support systems. He found a corner room with a single small window that looked out into space and settled down to examine his situation. The device seemed to respond to his presence, glowing brighter as he held it in both hands. The symbols on its surface began to shift and change, rearranging themselves into patterns that almost looked familiar. Jake stared at them, trying to understand what he was seeing. Then, suddenly, the symbols stopped moving. They had formed a pattern that Jake recognized immediately, though it took him a moment to understand why. It was a star map, showing the local sector of the galaxy in perfect detail. His location was marked with a pulsing dot of light, but there were other lights on the map as well. Dozens of them, scattered across hundreds of star systems. Each one pulsed in perfect synchronization with the others, as if they were all connected somehow. Jake realized he was looking at a network of some kind. A vast communication system that spanned the known galaxy, with nodes placed in strategic locations throughout inhabited space. The device in his hands was apparently one piece of this network. The implications were staggering. Someone had built a secret communication system that could reach anywhere in the galaxy instantly. The technology required for such a network was beyond anything Jake had ever heard of, even in the most advanced civilizations. His examination was interrupted by the sound of voices in the tunnel outside. His pursuers had found his trail after all. Jake quickly pocketed the device and moved to the small window. The view outside showed him exactly where he was on the station, and more importantly, it showed him another way out. A maintenance pod was docked at an external port less than 50 meters away. The voices were getting closer, and Jake could make out words in multiple languages. His pursuers were coordinating their search with military precision, sealing off potential escape routes and closing in on his position. Jake made his decision quickly. He activated his emergency maintenance override, a system designed to get workers out of dangerous situations. Alarms began sounding throughout the section as automated systems responded to what they interpreted as a life-threatening emergency. In the confusion that followed, Jake slipped out of his hiding place and made his way toward the external maintenance port. Behind him, he could hear his pursuer struggling to navigate the suddenly active security systems and emergency protocols. He reached the maintenance pod just as the first of his followers appeared in the corridor. Jake threw himself through the hatch and activated the pod's launch sequence, praying that his maintenance credentials were still valid for emergency departures. The pod shot away from the station with a force that pressed Jake back into his seat. Through the small porthole, he watched the massive structure shrink rapidly as he rocketed toward the nearest inhabited world. But even as he escaped immediate danger, Jake knew that his troubles were just beginning. Whatever he had gotten himself into by helping that alien, it was far larger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The device in his pocket continued to pulse with its strange light, as if counting down to something he couldn't yet understand. Queen Maria's command center erupted into controlled chaos as alarms sounded throughout the station. Multiple screens showed the maintenance pod's trajectory as it shot away from the docking bay, carrying the human and his mysterious cargo toward the planet below. Her security team scrambled to track the pod's destination while simultaneously trying to identify the individuals who had been pursuing the maintenance worker. The Queen's personal assistant, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Walsh, approached her station with a datapad filled with urgent reports. Her face was grim as she scrolled through the information that had been gathered in the past hour. Maria accepted the pad without taking her eyes off the main display. The maintenance pod was already approaching the planet's atmosphere, its heat shields glowing as it began its descent toward the surface. Whoever was piloting that pod knew exactly what they were doing. The background check on the human had revealed more questions than answers. Jake Morrison's official records showed him as a standard maintenance technician with an unremarkable work history. But there were gaps in his background that suggested a much more complex past. His technical skills were far beyond what his position required, and his security clearances were higher than they should have been for someone in his role. More disturbing were the individuals who had been tracking him through the station tunnels. Preliminary scans had identified them as members of at least 3 different species, all of whom carried military-grade equipment and moved with professional precision. They weren't casual observers or opportunistic criminals. They were hunters. Maria studied the sensor readings from the alien medical emergency that had started this entire sequence of events. The collapsed alien had carried identification that marked him as a simple traveling merchant, but the medical equipment scattered around him told a different story. Those devices were worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. The Queen activated her secure communication channel, connecting to her intelligence network throughout the station. Within minutes, she had agents stationed at key points throughout the facility, watching for any unusual activity that might be connected to the day's events. Her instincts told her that the alien's collapse in the marketplace had been no accident. Someone had wanted Jake Morrison to find him, wanted him to receive that mysterious device. The question was whether Jake himself was aware of the larger game being played around him. The maintenance pod's trajectory took it toward New Austin, the planet's largest city and primary spaceport. Maria's tracking system showed it landing in an industrial district on the outskirts of the urban area. Within hours, Jake Morrison would be lost in a population of over 10 million beings, from dozens of different species. Maria made a decision that would have surprised her advisors. Instead of sending security teams to pursue the escaped maintenance worker, she ordered her agents to monitor the situation from a distance. Something told her that forcing a confrontation now would only make things worse. The alien who had given Jake the device had disappeared from the station shortly after the incident. Her security teams had tracked him to a private docking bay where a ship waited with no filed flight plan. By the time her agents reached the bay, both the alien and his vessel were gone. But the ship's brief presence had been enough for her scanners to gather some interesting data. The vessel's energy signature matched no known species in the database, and its technology appeared to be far more advanced than anything currently available in known space. Maria found herself wondering if she had just witnessed the first contact with a completely unknown civilization. The possibilities and dangers inherent in such a situation made her pulse quicken with a mixture of excitement and fear. Her contemplation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the planet's surface. Governor Lisa Hamilton appeared on the main screen, her expression tense and worried. Behind her, Maria could see the lights of New Austin stretching toward the horizon. The governor wasted no time with pleasantries. Reports were coming in from across the city of unusual energy readings and unexplained technical malfunctions. Every piece of advanced technology in a 3-kilometer radius around the maintenance pod's landing site was showing signs of interference. What was more concerning was the response from the various alien communities within the city. Representatives from over a dozen species had contacted the governor's office within the past hour, all asking the same question about whether any unusual artifacts had been brought to the planet recently. Maria realized that the device Jake carried wasn't just unknown to humanity. It was causing reactions among alien species throughout the galaxy, species that apparently recognized its significance even if humans didn't. She ordered an immediate increase in security throughout her sector, while simultaneously reaching out to her contacts in other human colonies. If this device was as important as it appeared to be, other human settlements might soon find themselves dealing with similar situations. The responses came back faster than she had expected. 3 other human colonies reported unusual alien activity within their territories over the past several days. Ships from unknown species had been spotted on the edges of their systems, apparently conducting some kind of surveillance operations. 2 colonies reported that their communication networks had experienced brief but total failures, lasting exactly long enough for unidentified ships to pass through their territories undetected. Maria felt the pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. The alien who had collapsed on her station hadn't been a random merchant in distress. He had been a messenger, carrying something so important that entire civilizations were mobilizing to either protect or capture it. And now that message was in the hands of a human maintenance worker who had no idea what kind of forces he had unleashed by performing a simple act of kindness. The Queen made another decision that would have shocked her military advisors. She opened a direct communication channel to Jake Morrison's personal communicator, broadcasting on frequencies that would reach him regardless of where he went on the planet below. Her message was simple and direct. She identified herself and requested a meeting, promising safe passage and protection in exchange for information about what had happened on the station. She offered no threats and made no demands, trusting that his actions in the marketplace had revealed something important about his character. Whether he would respond remained to be seen. But Maria was certain of one thing. Jake Morrison was the key to understanding what was about to happen to humanity's place in the galaxy. The device he carried would either elevate the human race to a new level of galactic importance, or it would make them the target of forces beyond their current ability to comprehend. Either way, there was no going back to the way things were before. A simple maintenance worker decided to help a stranger in need. Jake Morrison crouched in the shadows of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of New Austin, his hands shaking as he examined the device that had turned his life upside down. The industrial district around him was nearly deserted at this hour, with only the distant hum of automated cargo loaders breaking the silence of the night. The device had begun behaving differently since his arrival on the planet's surface. The symbols on its crystalline surface now pulsed in rapid sequences, as if responding to some external signal he couldn't detect. More disturbing was the way it seemed to be affecting the technology around him. His communicator had started receiving messages in languages he didn't recognize, all of them marked as priority transmissions from locations throughout the galaxy. His maintenance scanner was picking up energy readings that shouldn't have been possible, showing power sources and technological signatures that defied everything he understood about physics. But it was the message from Queen Maria that had truly shaken him. Jake had heard of the Human Queen, of course. Everyone in human space knew about the woman who had united the scattered human colonies and established their first real foothold among the galactic powers. Her offer of protection and safe passage was tempting, especially given his current situation. The problem was that Jake wasn't entirely sure he could trust anyone at this point, even the leader of his own species. The old alien's words echoed in his mind again as he studied the device. The creature had told him things that made no sense at the time, but were beginning to take on a terrifying significance. He had spoken of ancient powers and hidden civilizations, of a network that connected every inhabited world in the galaxy. Most disturbing of all, the alien had insisted that Jake had been chosen specifically for this moment, not randomly selected because he happened to be nearby, but deliberately placed in position to receive the device when the time came. The implications of that statement were staggering. If the alien was telling the truth, then Jake's entire life had been manipulated to bring him to that marketplace at exactly the right moment. His job assignment, his shift schedule, even his route through the station might have been influenced by forces he couldn't begin to comprehend. Jake's examination of the device was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps, multiple sets moving with the careful precision of trained professionals. His pursuers had found him again, despite his efforts to stay hidden. He slipped the device back into his pocket and moved deeper into the warehouse, using the maze of storage containers and industrial equipment to mask his movements. The footsteps split up, with different groups taking positions around the building to prevent his escape. Through the grimy windows, Jake could see movement in the surrounding buildings. More figures were taking positions, creating a perimeter that would make it nearly impossible for him to leave the area undetected. But as Jake watched their movements, he noticed something strange. The individuals surrounding him weren't all working together. Two distinct groups were positioning themselves for what appeared to be a confrontation with each other, with Jake and his device as the prize they were both trying to claim. The situation became even more complex when a third group appeared, moving through the industrial district with equipment that looked more advanced than anything the first two groups carried. These newcomers took positions that would allow them to observe the confrontation without being directly involved. Jake realized he was witnessing something far larger than a simple pursuit. Multiple factions were converging on his location, each with their own agenda regarding the device he carried. The old alien's gift had made him the center of what appeared to be a three-way conflict between powers he couldn't identify. His communicator buzzed quietly with another incoming message. This one was from Queen Maria again, but the content made his blood run cold. She was warning him that multiple alien fleets had been detected on the edge of human space, all moving toward his current location. The device in his pocket wasn't just attracting attention from individuals and small groups. Entire civilizations were mobilizing in response to its presence on this world. Jake made a decision that would have surprised everyone who knew him. Instead of trying to escape or hide, he stood up and walked toward the center of the warehouse. If multiple groups were willing to start a war over the device he carried, then perhaps it was time to find out exactly what it was capable of. He pulled the device from his pocket and held it up where everyone could see it. The crystalline surface blazed with light that illuminated the entire warehouse, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. The effect on his watchers was immediate and dramatic. All three groups stopped their positioning and focused their attention entirely on Jake and the glowing device. Several individuals from different factions stepped forward, their various forms of communication equipment active as they reported to unseen commanders. Jake raised his voice, speaking clearly enough to be heard throughout the warehouse and by any listening devices his watchers might be carrying. He announced that he was willing to discuss the device and its significance, but only under neutral conditions with all interested parties present. The response was swift and surprising. Within minutes, representatives from all three groups approached the center of the warehouse, maintaining careful distances from each other, but clearly interested in Jake's proposal. The first representative was human, a woman in military attire who identified herself as Agent Sandra Mills from Imperial Intelligence. She explained that her organization had been tracking the device for months, following reports of similar artifacts appearing throughout human space. The second was a Zentari merchant prince named Corval, whose multiple eyes fixed on the device with obvious hunger. He offered Jake vast sums of credits in exchange for the artifact, promising wealth beyond anything a maintenance worker could imagine. The third representative was the most surprising. It was another alien of the same species as the creature who had given Jake the device in the first place. This one was younger and stronger, wearing robes that marked him as someone of significant importance within his civilization. The young alien introduced himself as Nexus Prime Kef, and his first words changed everything Jake thought he understood about the situation. He explained that Jake Morrison was not a random maintenance worker who had stumbled into a galactic conspiracy. He was the descendant of the last human to hold one of the ancient devices, and his genetic pattern had been encoded into the network over 200 years ago. The device had been waiting for him specifically, passed down through a chain of guardians who had protected it until the right moment arrived. Jake's act of kindness in the marketplace had simply been the trigger that activated a plan set in motion generations before his birth. The network the device connected him to wasn't just a communication system. It was the control mechanism for a defensive system that protected the galaxy from threats that existed beyond the borders of known space, and something was coming that would require the network to be activated for the first time in over 3 centuries. Jake stared at the device in his hands, finally understanding why so many different factions were willing to fight over it. He wasn't just holding a piece of advanced technology, he was holding the key to the galaxy's survival. The warehouse erupted into chaos as Jake's revelation sank in among the gathered representatives. Agent Mills immediately activated her emergency beacon, calling for reinforcements while keeping her weapon trained on the Zentari merchant prince. Corval's multiple eyes swiveled frantically between the glowing device and the various escape routes, calculating his odds of grabbing the artifact and surviving the encounter. But it was Nexus Prime Keth's reaction that truly worried Jake. The alien's face had gone completely pale, and his 4 hands were trembling as he reached for a communication device of his own. Whatever message he was sending was being transmitted with urgent priority to locations throughout the galaxy. Jake felt the device in his hands pulse more rapidly, as if responding to the tension in the room. The symbols on its surface were shifting again, forming new patterns that hurt his eyes to look at directly. He could feel something building within the crystalline structure, a power that seemed to be drawing energy from sources he couldn't identify. The situation deteriorated rapidly when additional forces began arriving at the warehouse. Agent Mills' reinforcements appeared first, surrounding the building with heavily armed soldiers carrying weapons Jake had never seen before. Their armor bore the insignia of the Human Defense Corps, marking them as elite troops used only in the most critical situations. The Zentari response was equally impressive. Corval's ship descended from orbit, its massive bulk casting shadows across the industrial district as it took position above the warehouse. Smaller craft detached from the main vessel, carrying what appeared to be entire squads of Zentari warriors. But the arrival of the third faction's reinforcements changed everything. A fleet of ships unlike anything Jake had ever seen materialized in the sky above New Austin. They weren't flying or using any visible propulsion system. They simply appeared, their crystalline hulls reflecting the planet's sun in patterns that made them almost impossible to look at directly. Nexus Prime Keth raised his communication device and spoke in his native language, his voice carrying clearly through the warehouse despite the chaos erupting outside. Jake couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakably that of someone reporting a critical emergency to higher authorities. The alien turned to Jake, his expression grave. The network Jake had accessed was more than just a defensive system. It was a monitoring network that kept track of threats from outside the galaxy. Threats that had been dormant for centuries, but were now stirring again. Jake's activation of the device had sent a signal across the galaxy, alerting every civilization that possessed the technology to receive it. The message was simple, but terrifying. The ancient enemy was returning, and the galaxy's defenses needed to be prepared. The problem was that most of the galaxy's civilizations had forgotten about the network over the centuries. They knew the devices existed, but they had lost the knowledge of how to use them properly. Only a few species still maintained the ancient protocols, and even they had begun to doubt that the threat was real. Jake's human ancestry complicated matters even further. According to Nexus Prime Keth, humans weren't supposed to be part of the network at all. They had been added to the system relatively recently, within the past few thousand years, by a civilization that had recognized their potential importance in the coming conflict. But most of the galaxy's older civilizations didn't accept humanity's role in the network. They viewed humans as newcomers who had stumbled into technologies they couldn't understand, potentially dangerous in their ignorance of the proper protocols. The standoff in the warehouse was interrupted by a new voice speaking directly from the device in Jake's hands. The crystalline artifact projected a holographic image of an ancient alien, its form unlike anything Jake had ever encountered. The being spoke in perfect English, though its mouth movements didn't match the words. The hologram introduced itself as Archive Prime, the central intelligence that coordinated the galaxy's defensive network. It had been dormant for over 300 years, waiting for the right signal to reactivate the system and begin preparations for the ancient enemy's return. Jake's activation of the device had provided that signal. Archive Prime explained that the network required active cooperation between multiple species to function properly. The devices were scattered across hundreds of worlds, each one requiring a genetically compatible guardian to maintain the connection. Most of these guardians had been identified and trained over generations, but new ones were needed as the old bloodlines died out. Jake's genetic pattern marked him as one of the new guardians, specifically chosen to represent humanity's interests in the network. But his role came with responsibilities and dangers that few beings in the galaxy were prepared to handle. The ancient enemy that was returning had destroyed entire civilizations in the past, consuming their resources and leaving dead worlds in their wake. The defensive network was the galaxy's only proven defense against this threat, but it required constant maintenance and coordination to remain effective. Agent Mills stepped forward, her weapon still drawn but no longer pointed at the other representatives. She demanded to know why the Human Defense Corps hadn't been informed about this network or humanity's role in defending the galaxy. Archive Prime's response was disturbing. Humanity's governments were considered too unstable and politically divided to be trusted with information about the network. The decision had been made to work through individuals like Jake, who could be trained and equipped without involving the broader human political structure. Corval's reaction was predictably focused on profit. He offered to purchase Jake's cooperation, promising vast rewards for access to the network's advanced technologies. His species had apparently been trying to reverse engineer captured devices for decades without success, but Nexus Prime Keth's response carried the most weight. His civilization was one of the network's founding members, and they had maintained their responsibilities even through the long centuries when the threat seemed distant and theoretical. If Jake accepted his role as a guardian, he would need to be trained in protocols that had been developed over millions of years. The training would require him to leave Earth and spend several years studying with the network's other guardians. He would learn technologies that were beyond current human understanding, and he would be responsible for establishing humanity's permanent connection to the galaxy's defensive system. But if he refused, the network would remain incomplete, potentially leaving the entire galaxy vulnerable when the ancient enemy finally arrived. Jake stared at the device in his hands, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden. A few hours ago, he had been a simple maintenance worker whose biggest concern was completing his daily inspection rounds. Now he held the fate of entire civilizations in his hands. The choice he made in the next few minutes would determine whether humanity joined the galaxy's established civilizations as an equal partner, or remained on the sidelines while others decided the fate of all living beings in known space. Jake's hands trembled as the implications of Archive Prime's words sank in. The holographic figure continued speaking, providing details about the ancient enemy that made his blood run cold. These beings consumed entire star systems, converting matter and energy into vast fleets that grew stronger with each world they destroyed. They had appeared in the galaxy 3 times before, each invasion separated by roughly 1,000 years. The last invasion had been defeated only through the combined efforts of every advanced civilization in the galaxy, working together through the network that Jake now held a piece of. Billions had died in that conflict, and entire species had been wiped from existence. The survivors had built the monitoring network to ensure they would have warning when the enemy returned. That warning had finally come. The devices scattered throughout the galaxy were detecting movement beyond the galactic rim, massive energy signatures that matched the ancient enemy's technology. The invasion would begin within the next few years, giving the galaxy's defenders very little time to prepare. Archive Prime's hologram flickered as it delivered the final piece of information that changed everything. The network required a minimum number of active Guardians to function at full capacity. Currently, they were 3 Guardians short of that minimum, with Jake being one of the potential candidates identified through genetic screening. If he refused his role, the network would remain below minimum capacity, leaving crucial gaps in the galaxy's early warning system. The ancient enemy would be able to approach key systems undetected, potentially overwhelming the defenses before the Guardian civilizations could mount an effective response. Agent Mills had been recording everything on her communicator, transmitting the conversation directly to Human Defense Corps headquarters. Jake could see her struggle with the implications of what they were learning. Humanity was being offered a role in galactic affairs far beyond anything they had previously imagined, but it came with responsibilities that could reshape their entire civilization. Corval's multiple eyes were fixed on the device with obvious greed, but Jake noticed that the Zentari merchant prince was also calculating something else. His species were notorious traders who valued information as much as physical goods. The knowledge of the ancient enemy's return would be worth tremendous amounts to civilizations throughout the galaxy. Nexus Prime Keth approached Jake slowly, his 4 hands spread in what appeared to be a gesture of peace. The alien explained that the training process for new Guardians was intensive, but not dangerous. Jake would spend time with each of the established Guardian species, learning their portion of the network protocols while contributing humanity's unique perspectives to the overall system. The alien also revealed something that surprised everyone present. Humanity's inclusion in the network hadn't been arbitrary or recent. Archaeological evidence suggested that humans had encountered the ancient enemy during their species' early development, possibly influencing their evolution in ways that made them particularly suited to certain network functions. This revelation caused immediate tension between the various factions present. Agent Mills demanded access to any archaeological evidence that supported this claim, while Corval began calculating the potential value of exclusive trading rights with a species that had historical connections to the galaxy's most advanced defensive system. Jake found himself at the center of negotiations that would affect the future of human civilization. Every word he spoke could potentially commit his entire species to courses of action they weren't prepared to understand, let alone implement. The device in his hands pulsed again, and Jake realized that it was responding to his emotional state. The more uncertain and stressed he became, the more active the artifact seemed to grow. Archive Prime seemed to notice this as well, adjusting its communication protocols to provide more direct guidance. According to the holographic intelligence, Jake's genetic compatibility with the network was particularly strong, suggesting that his human ancestors had been specifically selected for preservation of certain traits. This meant that his decision wouldn't just affect his own life, but could influence how humanity integrated with galactic civilization for generations to come. The conversation was interrupted by urgent communications from orbit. Queen Maria's voice came through Agent Mills's communicator, reporting that additional alien fleets were arriving in the system hourly. Some came peacefully, apparently drawn by the same signals that had alerted the factions already present. Others arrived with weapons powered and defensive systems active, treating the situation as a potential threat to galactic security. Jake realized that a simple act of helping an injured alien had triggered the largest gathering of different species in recorded galactic history. Representatives from civilizations that hadn't communicated in centuries were now converging on this single world, all focused on a device small enough to hold in his hands. Archive Prime provided additional context that made the situation even more complex. The network operated on consensus protocols, meaning that major decisions required agreement from all participating civilizations. Jake's acceptance of guardianship would need to be approved by species that had been part of the system for millions of years. Some of these organizations were already expressing reservations about humanity's inclusion. They viewed humans as too young and unpredictable to be trusted with network access, particularly given humanity's history of internal conflicts and political instability. But other civilizations had apparently been advocating for human inclusion for centuries, arguing that humanity's rapid technological development and adaptive capabilities made them ideal candidates for guardianship roles that required flexibility and creative problem-solving. Jake found himself wondering if this entire situation had been orchestrated from the beginning. The alien who had collapsed in the marketplace had carried identification that marked him as a simple merchant, but Archive Prime now revealed that he was actually a high-ranking coordinator within the network. The collapse had been staged to ensure that Jake would encounter the device under circumstances that would demonstrate his character and decision-making capabilities. His choice to help a stranger in need had been the final test of his suitability for guardianship. Now that he understood the true scope of what was happening, Jake had to make a choice that would affect not just his own life, but the survival of every living being in the galaxy. The ancient enemy was coming, and humanity's response to that threat would determine their place in galactic civilization for all time. Jake looked at the faces surrounding him, seeing representatives of civilizations that spanned the galaxy all waiting for his decision. The device in his hands continued to pulse with its strange light, as if counting down to a moment when choice would no longer be possible. He thought about the life he had been living just hours before, the simple routine of maintaining systems and solving technical problems. That life was gone forever, regardless of what choice he made now. The only question was whether he would face the future as humanity's representative in a galaxy-wide alliance, or as someone who had walked away when his species needed him most. The moment Jake made his decision, everything changed. He looked directly at Archive Prime's holographic form and spoke the words that would reshape humanity's future forever. He accepted the role of Guardian, understanding the responsibilities and dangers that came with it, and committed to representing his species in the galaxy's ancient defensive network. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The device in his hands blazed with light that filled the entire warehouse, casting shadows that seemed to move with purpose through the building. Every piece of technology within a kilometer radius began responding to signals from the artifact, creating a cascade of activation sequences that spread outward from Jake's position. Archive Prime's hologram smiled, an expression that somehow translated across the vast differences between species. The ancient intelligence began transmitting data directly to Jake's mind through the device, flooding his consciousness with information about the network's history, protocols, and current status. Jake staggered under the mental weight of receiving thousands of years of accumulated knowledge in a matter of seconds. He learned about civilizations that had risen and fallen while maintaining their guardianship duties, about technologies that could manipulate space and time, and about the true nature of the ancient enemy that threatened all life in the galaxy. The enemy wasn't a single species or civilization. It was something far worse, a form of artificial intelligence that had evolved beyond the need for physical form. It consumed matter and energy not out of biological necessity, but to fuel its endless expansion across the universe. Each galaxy it conquered added to its computational power, making it stronger for the next invasion. Earth's solar system was one of hundreds of strategic positions throughout the galaxy where the network maintained monitoring stations. These outposts watched the spaces between galaxies, looking for the energy signatures that would herald the enemy's return. Jake's device was the key to activating humanity's monitoring station, bringing it online for the first time in over 3 centuries. Agent Mills was frantically trying to maintain communication with Human Defense Corps headquarters, but the energy emanating from Jake's device was interfering with most forms of electronic communication. She could only watch as Jake underwent a transformation that would make him fundamentally different from every other human who had ever lived. Corval had given up any pretense of merchant civility and was openly calculating his options for seizing the device by force. But Nexus Prime Keith positioned himself between the Zentari and Jake, making it clear that any attempt to interfere with the Guardian activation process would be met with immediate retaliation. The warehouse shook as additional ships arrived in the atmosphere above New Austin. Archive Prime's hologram flickered with incoming communications from across the galaxy, as other Guardians acknowledged Jake's acceptance into the network. Each confirmation came with offers of training and support, but also with warnings about the challenges he would face. Jake's consciousness expanded as the device completed its initial connection to his nervous system. He could suddenly sense the locations of every other Guardian in the galaxy, feeling their presence like distant stars in his mind. Some were ancient beings who had held their positions for thousands of years, while others were relatively new to their roles but no less committed to the defense of their civilizations. Most surprisingly, Jake could sense other potential Guardians among humanity, individuals whose genetic patterns marked them as capable of bonding with network devices. There were dozens of them scattered across human space, most completely unaware of their potential significance in galactic affairs. The realization that hit Jake hardest was that he wouldn't be alone in representing humanity. The network was designed to prevent any single individual from carrying too much responsibility, distributing the load among multiple Guardians from each participating species. Archive Prime began explaining the training process that Jake would need to undergo. He would visit 7 different worlds, each controlled by a different Guardian species, learning specialized skills required for network operation. The training would take approximately 2 years of Galactic Standard Time, during which he would be completely cut off from normal human society. But the knowledge and abilities he would gain during that training would transform him into something beyond current human capabilities. Guardian training involved genetic modifications that enhanced mental processing speed, sensory perception, and resistance to various forms of energy that were common in network operations. Agent Mills finally managed to establish a secure communication link with her headquarters, and the response was immediate and intense. The Human Defense Corps was mobilizing every available asset to protect Jake during his transition, treating him as a strategic resource of incalculable value to human civilization. Queen Maria's voice came through the communicator with orders that surprised everyone present. Instead of demanding that Jake remain in human space for extensive debriefing, she authorized his immediate departure for Guardian training. The Queen apparently understood that humanity's long-term interests required Jake to complete his preparation as quickly as possible. Corval made one final attempt to claim the device, offering Jake personal wealth beyond imagination in exchange for just a few hours of access to the artifact. But Jake could now sense the Zentari's true intentions through the network, feeling the Merchant Prince's plans to duplicate the device and sell copies to the highest bidders throughout the galaxy. The refusal was delivered not by Jake but by Archive Prime speaking through the device. The holographic intelligence made it clear that any attempt to interfere with Guardian training would be considered an act of aggression against the entire network, bringing immediate retaliation from civilizations spanning the galaxy. Outside the warehouse, the gathering of alien fleets had grown to unprecedented proportions. Representatives from over 50 different species were now in orbit around the planet, all drawn by the signals emanating from Jake's device. Most came in peace, offering support and resources for humanity's integration into the network. But several fleets maintained combat-ready positions, apparently skeptical of humanity's fitness for Guardian responsibilities. These civilizations would need to be convinced through Jake's actions during his training, or they could potentially move to prevent human participation in the network entirely. Nexus Prime Keth approached Jake as the initial activation process completed. The alien's expression was solemn as he explained what Jake's acceptance meant for both their species. Humanity would now be committed to defending the galaxy against the ancient enemy, a responsibility that could require tremendous sacrifices when the time came for active resistance. But humanity would also gain access to technologies and knowledge that could advance their civilization by thousands of years almost overnight. The network's member species had agreed to share certain fundamental technologies with new Guardians, ensuring that each participating civilization could contribute meaningfully to the collective defense. Jake felt the weight of his decision settling over him like a mantle of responsibility that would never be lifted. He was no longer just Jake Morrison, maintenance worker from a minor human colony. He was Guardian Prime Morrison, humanity's first representative in a galactic alliance that had protected all known life for millions of years. The ancient enemy was coming, and now humanity would stand with the galaxy's greatest civilizations in the final battle for survival. Archive Prime's final words before the initial connection process ended were both encouraging and ominous. Jake had exceeded all expectations during his activation, showing compatibility ratings that were among the highest ever recorded in network history. But compatibility also meant that he would be among the primary targets when the ancient enemy finally arrived, marked for elimination because of his critical role in coordinating the galaxy's defenses. The war for the galaxy's survival had begun the moment Jake accepted his guardianship, and there would be no turning back.